Hey, just to let you know that story time happens on Saturday, every Saturday that I can. But if you don't like story time, just wait until Tuesday. My regular machine shop videos will be up and you can watch those. Okay. Well, Nick Collier here again, and it's story time. We're standing at probably the lowest point on my property, overlooking the autumn leaves, and this year was pretty spectacular. It didn't last as long as it does normally because we had a couple of good-sized rainstorms that brought all the leaves down, but there's still a bunch of color left, and we're happy about that. It's gotten cold, so and wet, which is great. It's early November right now. This story happened when I was probably just barely 16. I mean, I turned 16 in March. Probably this story happens in July. Got my driver's license right away. We were, my buddy and I, Randy Black and I, were hanging out in his parents' property, and there was a little cabin out back, just a funky little, actually a work shed, but it was our smoking den. And you know, 1966, 65, 67, somewhere in there, everything was about marijuana. The whole world revolved around marijuana. And being entrepreneurs that we were, and not really too motivated to do anything else, we would buy, and at that point there was just tons of pot coming in from Mexico and Colombia, you know, just rot gut weed, just the worst stuff you could ever see. But you know, you could get it cheap and sell it. So we would buy a half pound and break it up and go out and sell it and get a few bucks and come back. You know, I mean, literally you buy a half pound for, you know, $75 and then sell ounces for $10. You know, this was back in the day. So we made a little money, and we were able to keep ourselves in plenty of smoke. At one point, and we had plenty of harebrained schemes. And at one point, Randy says, "Hey, you know, it's summertime. We should just go to Yosemite." And I say, "Oh, yeah, good idea." You know, smoking a joint and being a little hazy. He's like, "Yeah, let's go to Yosemite." He says, "We got a half a pound here. We'll just take it with us and we'll sell it in Yosemite, and that'll keep us in money while we're there." I said, "Cool." So, but we didn't have a car. And he says, "Well, I can borrow my aunt's Chevy." And it was like a 1953 Chevy, 4-door. And it was pretty much a piece of junk. I mean, it barely ran, you know, and I knew how to work on cars. I just didn't feel like it, you know. It was just like I was too stoned to do anything. So we, you know, we got in the car, we put some money in the gas. You know, it probably cost us $10 to drive from the Bay Area to Yosemite. Gas was like 20 cents a gallon. So we get in the car and we head off to Yosemite. And literally this car can't do, you know, top speed 40 miles per hour. Probably if I'd given it a little tune-up, it would have done much better. But, you know, those old Chevys, if you didn't take care of them, they just dogged and dogged and dogged until you just drove them out into the back 40 and dumped them. And this one had been pretty much driven out into the back 40 and dumped. And literally, every time we put a tank of gas in that car, we'd have to put 3 quarts of oil in, because it burned that much oil. So we get to Yosemite, and it's, you know, back in those days, Yosemite was empty. There was hardly anybody there. And it was midsummer. And, you know, a lot of mountain climbers and a few tourists and a bunch of rangers. So we found ourselves a little campsite, and that first afternoon we thought, oh, you know, and we'd broken all this half pound up into smaller amounts so we could get rid of it. So that afternoon we went up to Stoneman Bridge of all things. You know, it was named back in the 1920s or something like that. And that was where all the young people hung out. But literally, it was just a little bit early. It was just pre hippie days. You know, the Love Generation, the Summer of Love, which happened in '67, I believe, maybe '66. And there was nobody there to buy any. And it was like, wow. And, you know, we had like 57 cents between us expecting to sell this. So we were kind of hungry, and, you know, we camped out. And after a while, we'd sell a little bit here and there, but, you know, not much. And the guys that were camped next to us, a couple of biker guys. Now, they didn't have any money either. But they had their bikes, and they had a bunch of beer. And we said, okay, we'll trade you pot for beer. Which we did for about a week and a half. We stayed there. And, you know, we were stoned and drunk the whole time. So at one point, a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks later, we decided, okay, let's leave here. There's nothing really going on. Let's go on up to Lake Tahoe. And Randy's grandfather lived in Lake Tahoe. He had a little trailer camp there. So, you know, we put on up to Lake Tahoe. I mean, you know, the fact that we didn't sell any weed meant we had a bunch of it left over. And we were puffing away at it pretty heavily. As would be in those days. So we drove to Lake Tahoe, and it was like, it probably took 2 tanks of gas to get to Lake Tahoe because this little car just couldn't make it. And we were driving through the mountains, and, you know, constantly in first gear. So, you know, you go from gas station to gas station. And back in those days, 395 had, you know, 3 gas stations throughout the entire 395. So every time we got to a gas station, we'd stop, put some gas in, and of course put some oil in, because it was going through oil like, you know, like a sieve. And then we'd get back. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Yeah, we took with us in the back seat of the car a Harley Davidson. Now, it wasn't a, you know, like a big Harley. It was like a Harley 125, something like that, an old army bike, and it fit mostly in the back seat, except we had to have the door open just a little bit because the wheel hit the door. I mean, the door was open like, you know, 3 inches. So we tied the door to each other, and we took this bike with us. And so we get to Tahoe, and again, I hardly have any money. And in Tahoe, basically, all the young people were with parents, and they didn't dare buy any pot. So again, we had a bunch of pot and no place to sell it. So we smoked it. And at that point, we were probably starting to get kind of low, and didn't have any money and didn't have any pot, or still had some. But you know, we were out of money. And it was like nothing to do if you didn't have money. I mean, it didn't take much money to be in Tahoe, but it did take some. So we wandered around Tahoe, kind of bummed around for oh, I don't know, 3 or 4 days, and we were not sure what to do because, you know, without cash you can't really do much. So we were thinking, well, maybe we had $10 stashed so we could make it home. Maybe we'll just go home. You know, we've been out for about 3 weeks at that point, and it was really my first time out, away from Mom and Dad and the family and everything. So we decided, okay, the next morning we're gonna just pack it in and blast back to the Bay Area where I live. Oh, I forgot to say that motorcycle, whenever we came into a place like Yosemite, we'd pull that motorcycle out and we'd putter along. And this motorcycle was in as bad a shape as the '53 Chevy. You know, you just barely get it started and it'd go pop, 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 you know, just put along. But, you know, we had fun. It was great. And it was, you know, kind of a olive drab color like any bike would be out of the Second World War. So, and again, in Tahoe, we putted around with this bike, and it was cheap on gas, so, you know, we could, you know, go places without spending an arm and a leg. And in those days, an arm and a leg was like $1.50. So we decided, okay, the next morning, we're just going to pack it in and go. So we're driving around, and I say, hey, man, I got to take a leak. So he pulls into this gas station and pulls around back, and I go into the bathroom, and I go over to the toilet, and sitting right on the toilet behind the, you know, on the little platform where the tank is, was a wallet. And I'm like, really? So I grabbed the wallet and I ran back out to the car and I said, okay, get out of here quick. And he starts the little Chevy up and puts out and drives away. And while he's doing that, I'm looking in the wallet and there's $50. I'm like, $50? Oh man. And so, you know, we can stay in Tahoe for another week or so without a problem. And but, you know, as I'm going through the wallet, I realize that the guy who owns the wallet had just been in a liquor store that we were in. And I thought, you know, I don't want this guy to have a really bad trip, you know, by losing his wallet. And there was a bunch of credit cards and all kinds of, you know, ID stuff and everything. And I was like, oh man. So I told Randy, I says, okay, let's turn around. Let's go back to that liquor store. I'd seen him in that liquor store about 20 minutes earlier. And I said, we'll just go back to the liquor store, leave the wallet with the liquor store guy, and the liquor store guy will give it to him. But we'll keep the $50. And so we go back to the liquor store, and, you know, I'm stoned out, and I barely think. And I walk it into the liquor store, and I put it on the counter, and I said, this guy lost this wallet. He was here a while back, and you can give it to him. And I turn around to walk out, and there's the guy. I'm like, yeah! You know, in my mind, my muddled mind at the time, he looks down, and I had just taken my hand off the wallet. He says, you got my wallet. I said, well, yeah, I was going to give it back to you through the liquor store. He said, well, yeah, okay, fine. And he picks up the wallet and he goes through. He says, you got my $50. I says, it didn't have $50 in it when I found it. Yeah, you got it. And he started getting on my case. Instead of thanking me for bringing the wallet back, and he started getting on my case. And I'm starting to get pretty nervous. And, I'm 16 and he's probably 40. But I just hung in there. you know, just lie my way through it. That was my motto in those days. So whatever it takes, just lie your way through it and deny everything. And I did, and I was good at it. And eventually we got to the end, and he said, well, okay, yeah, fine. So I walk out and get in the car, and we drive away. And I got $50 in my pocket. And I was like, yeah. And basically what we did with that $50 was, there was an arcade close by, and we played pinball machines and you know, all kinds of, well, there were no video games back then. It was all manual, but pinball machines and you know, basketball and you know, punching bags and that sort of thing. But we had a great time for about another week. We just blew the money because we knew we had to be back at the end of the month. So we just we lived like kings. We went and bought hot dogs and hamburgers for our friends, and oh man, did we have a good time. And so at the end of that, we put gas in the old car. Oh, by the way, at that point, that last time we put gas in the car to drive home, I happened to notice that the oil was leaking out of the oil filter. And I looked at it and I went, wow, interesting. So I borrowed a crescent wrench and I tightened the filter. I mean, like one turn, and it tightened up. And we never went through another drop of oil. I swear we must have went through a whole case of oil. But oil back then was cheap, and you know, we were 16. We didn't care. And so drove back home without an incident, no problem. We were completely out of pot at that point, and we were having a great time. This is Nick Collier, checking out.